Hello and welcome to M&A's Church Planting and Renewal Conversations. I'm Chris Vogel, Director of Next Gen Pastors, and I serve M&A as the Director of Ecosystems Development. Christmas Evans was a Welsh preacher in the early 1800s. He's well known for saying, "I'd rather burn out than rust out in the service of the Lord." Evans, I think, articulated what many pastors live out each day. I would have to say, much to the dishonor of Christ. You see, studies have shown that nutrition, physical exercise, and other forms of self-care are at the lower levels for pastors than the general population. They are more often overweight and have higher levels of depression. There indeed may be many reasons for this, but it must be noted that clergy has a certain unique situation, for it is the only profession that wraps personal identity, professional identity, and religious identity all in the same package. Now, in today's Church Plant Renewal Conversations, we are beginning a monthly series on resilience in ministry. On the second Wednesday for the next several months, we'll have with us the M&A's coaching specialist, Vincent Torello, and joining him is Charles Hooper, an executive coach and leadership development advisor. Vinny, Charles, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks for that winsome and insightful introduction. It's very helpful to frame it that way. Yeah, I think Charles and I, being friends as well as colleagues, thought it might be fun to kind of introduce one another instead of doing our own little introduction. So I'm happy to kick it off, Charles, and introduce you, if you wouldn't mind returning the favor on the other end of that.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah, so Charles is an executive and leadership development coach. He has the distinction of being an MCC, which is a Master Certified Coach by the International Coach Federation. And he's worked with senior leaders and their organizations in a variety of industries and organizations. He's especially skilled at accelerating leaders with focus in the key areas of their own professional and personal lives. And in coordination with his own private practice, he also trains coaches with 2 international coach training companies. He's married, has 6 adult sons, and just as a personal note, he's just a great friend and brother. When I had this crazy idea to transition out of full-time ministry and into full-time coaching, someone said, "Oh, you ought to talk to Charles Hooper." And I did, and I've been talking to him ever since.
Yeah, that's right. Wow. Well, thanks, Vinny. I'm going to take a much more personal approach as I introduce my friend and colleague, Vinny, husband to Lorraine, and father. He's a brother from another mother, lives up in Philly. I live in Atlanta. And as Vinny and I got to know each other, I really saw his pastoral heart, and we would exchange coaching back and forth. And I just felt so cared for, so listened to. The penetrating questions that he would ask, and just the warmth of his heart with the Lord caused my heart to be warmed. And so Vinny and I talk every Friday, and sometimes we'll exchange coaching back and forth, or sometimes we're just celebrating or commiserating with each other. But yeah, he's a good man, and I'm so excited for his role with M&A as the first, perhaps of many, one day of Coaching Catalyst. So it's really fun to be able to be on this podcast together and work together.
Thanks, Charles. Wow. I'm humbled.
Vinny, kick us off. Why are we here, and what are we talking about?
Yeah. So, this topic, self-care, is near and dear to me, and I know it is to Charles. In part, I think for me, it's because I failed at it, and I'm a survivor of burnout, pretty serious burnout, and so I learned the hard way of the importance of this, and I've definitely, made changes and have benefited from it, but I too was under that, I think, right view of the ministry as a noble task, But I think I went, as I often do, I overdid that and went to the extreme, and making it so noble that, it's better to rust out, right? To ruin yourself than to rust out. And I think that idea, coupled with the idea that ministry is about sacrificing, and so you add that to some of the really crazy expectations that we put on ourselves and the unrealistic ones that others put upon us, and then our own hangups and bad habits, and you have a recipe for disaster in terms of your own well-being. I remember especially when I was on a sabbatical, and after about a month, when I finally was started to settle myself and could stop thinking about work or working, I started to reflect and realize, I thought I was doing so much better than I really was in so many areas. And then I started to realize, no, I'm really not. And it gave me time to really reflect on that and make some changes at that point. So self-care is really critical subject, especially in a pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. And, Vinny, you and I have talked about our seasons of burnout. I've actually burned out twice at two different churches when I was on the pastoral staff. And I started to think, maybe it's not all the circumstances. Maybe it's something in me that needs to change. And there was an article that came out in Harvard Business Review in 2007, and it was called Managing Your Energy, Not Your Time. And I was going to read just a few parts of this that resonated with me when I first read it. The article said the majority of professionals are overworked, underrested, exercised, perpetually exhausted, giving leftovers to family, guilty, disengaged, and dissatisfied. And I thought, yep, it's like you're reading my journal during both of those seasons of burnout. And then the article went on to talk about not only just managing time, but managing energy. And I think that's an interesting concept that helped me begin to rebuild after those burnout times. But yeah, this topic of self-care has become something that I've become very diligent in because of that.
Now, when we say self-care, there's often the phrase is self-care selfish? And a lot of times I think we're just wired to serve and to be for others. It's not about ourselves. So how do you encourage people to think through this in a way that is healthy, biblical, and life-giving?
Yeah, I love the quote by Parker Palmer. He says, self-care is never a selfish act. It is simply good stewardship of the only gift I have, the gift I was put on the earth to offer to others. When you think about that, we often think of ministry and a tool belt and tools, but ultimately the thing we give is ourselves. And so if we don't have much to give, or if we're not even fully present in anything that we're doing, what are we actually giving? Yeah. And if we're always at the margins and at the edges, squeezing out the last drop, how does that really satisfy the parched soul?
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, one of the books that we talked about highlighting is Resilient Ministry, and I read that for the second time this last quarter. And in theme 2, the authors are talking about self-care. And in this statement really stood out to me that talks about your point, Chris. The statement of you cannot care for others without first taking care of yourself is so true. And I was reminded of a calendar conflict that I had with my wife. I was a singles pastor and a discipleship pastor at a church here in Atlanta. And before we did a preparing for marriage seminar with a bunch of singles who were engaged or planning to be married, I would meet with each couple, go over their prepare and enrich results, kind of orient them to the seminar. And so on our calendar in the kitchen, I would write PFM all over the calendar before that seminar. And, you know, there were evenings, sometimes 2 meetings with 2 different couples in an evening, Saturdays, Sunday afternoons. One day, my wife said, Charles, do you know what PFM stands for? And I thought, well, of course, I designed this program. And she said, it stands for preparing for a failing marriage. And I thought she was joking until she wasn't smiling. And she looked at me and just said, Charles, you are preparing for a failing marriage if you keep doing this. You're not taking care of your marriage. Oh, no. So from then on, I decided not to keep meeting with these couples. And she said, just let them show up to the workshop. They'll be fine if you don't meet with them. But that was kind of a painful memory when I was not taking care of myself. And I realized my marriage was much more of a priority than those couples, some of which I don't even remember their names now. So painful memory about self-care.
Wow. You know, it's interesting with your question, Chris. I would love to hear from the participants, you know, when they hear that term self-care, what do they think of, or what's their response to that? If they wouldn't mind putting that in the chat box, and maybe, you know, where they're calling in from.
Great. Yeah, yep. Some secular. This is what the world does. It's, you know, it's all about me. That's an easy one to confuse them.
Yeah. Vital for Christ honoring ministry. Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
Great. Hard to implement. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
A lifetime.
Yeah. Buzzword along with coaching. Yeah. Letting God nurture my soul. Yeah. Thanks, Naomi.
Yeah. Sounds indulgent. Appropriate selfishness. Interesting.
Yeah.
Connection there.
New
Sabbath. 1 and 7. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it seems like yeah, there's maybe more, maybe negatives, maybe a few more negatives than there are positives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For a while, I would, and sometimes still do, refer to as soul care. Now, then it gets confused with spiritual formation.
True.
But for some reason, when people hear self-care, the defenses go up, they don't hear. So, you know, caring for our soul is caring for our whole being, our body, our mind.
That's right.
So,
yeah, Michael's made a good point, mostly positive and even compatible with what it means to love the Lord and love others. Yep. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I like as these others are coming up, the definition Peter Brain says about this in his book, Going the Distance, that when it comes to self-care, it's the wisdom to ensure, as far as humanly possible, a wise and orderly work that conserves and lengthens a pastor's ministry. It's the ongoing development of the whole person, including emotional, spiritual, relational, physical, and intellectual areas of life.
Mm.
It is that whole being, the whole concept.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, if you're interested in seeing some of these comments in the chat, look down there on the bottom and click the little icon chat, and you'll see some of the things that people are writing in. Yeah.
You know, I think one element of our humanity is that we're embodied spirits. We're not simply spiritual, we're also physical. And I think that reality means that we are limited, and we have limitations. And, you know, we have a beginning and an end. And honoring that is a huge part of what self-care is about.
Yeah.
Someone says here that chats are hidden to us. And I'm not sure why that would be. So I will say, as you're for the attendees, after the program, all this is being recorded. We'll be sending this out, the video out to you, or link to the YouTube once it's captured and set up. But you'll also be receiving any links that we've mentioned, like the Resilient Ministry, the great book that's been referred to. I'll have a link to where you can get that on Amazon or what have you. I'll also capture what's up on this, and you'll get a Word doc that will have the panelist engagement, what they're putting up here as well, so you can go back and look through it then. So sorry for any glitch that if you're not seeing the chat box, but if some of you are seeing it, if you can't, just check the chat box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Should be able to get that. So good.
Yeah. And Chris, I don't know if you hit those 3 buttons there, if it might change the settings so that more people could see it. But if not, yeah, we've got it on the recording.
Which?
Yeah, in the chat box to the right of where it says panelists, the 3 box, you might be able to change the view settings. Not sure if that would help.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's set that they can chat with us, not with each other.
Right. Okay.
And
okay. Yeah.
It's like passing notes during class, so I don't let
Yeah.
the attendees to talk to each other. You can do that offline.
Yes. All right.
So, well, good. Well, let's keep talking as so this is coming up. What else should we be thinking about when we talk about this whole subject? Why is this a dominant theme? You had mentioned, Vinny, because we're whole people, I think is key to it. What else should come to mind?
Yeah. One thing that I wrote in my journal is I reflected back on 2 seasons of burnout. I wrote down some of the practices which now keep me healthy are weekly planning time, weekly Sabbath, and of course we know the challenges of trying to do a Lord's Day when we're in charge of leading worship, daily time with God, regular exercise, reasonable diet. And here's something that I've tried recently that really has had a huge difference in my self-care, is turning off all notifications on my phone and computer. So the dings, the pings, the rings are no longer attacking my mind. And it's amazing how I'm able to stay focused. I'm not as drained when I'm spending a large portion of my day on Zoom, but just feeling like I'm getting my brain back. And I had no idea just the mental self-care that I needed. So I love getting those little dopamine hits through the pings, dings, and the rings. Not watching the news daily. Boy, I was just addicted to watching the news before the election. And when I stopped watching it daily, I started to feel more healthy. Another one for me, kind of as an INTJ, who's also a maximizer on StrengthsFinder, I can see 99 things that are going well, but for some reason I can find that one thing that needs to be maximized.
Mm.
And so I can become critical, and that really impacts kind of my attitude and energy. It impacts people around me.
Yeah.
So just cultivating a positive attitude has been amazing for my self-care. Getting 7 hours of sleep a night and seeing that as a key element, that I'm not going to wake up early for meetings. I'm not going to stay up late for meetings. I'm going to get sleep. And so, whether it was when I was in pastoral ministry and now working with executive clients, it seems like self-care is so important. I just enjoyed kind of reading my reflection list of what I had learned from 2 times of burnout. So, yeah.
Yeah.
That's great, Charles. You kind of highlighted all five domains, if you will, of self-care. The emotional life, your spiritual. Then there's the third would be your social or relational domain, the intellectual, and the physical. And there needs to be, thought and care in each of these areas, because that's who we are as human beings. All of these areas are important. Not just the spiritual life, but even the social and relational. And I know we are concerned about marriages, but also friendships.
Yeah.
One of the things that Charles and I routinely say on Friday is, our call signals it's the weekend is coming. And we talk about what we're going to do, and that friendship, that camaraderie, I look forward to it. Occasionally we have to miss it. And when we do, I really miss it.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
I'm wondering.
Again, it's such a challenge right now. The social relational. How do we do it prudently and wisely?
Yeah.
Because we can harm, if we, especially for those of us who might be older or more compromised, it can hit us. COVID can hit us in a very harmful way. So that's not self-care. But at the same time, being sequestered off is not self-care. It's not healthy one way or the other.
Yeah, that's right.
In so many ways, I think we're somewhat wired professionally against it. And I love the beginning of Calvin's Institutes, where he says, nearly all wisdom that we possess, that is to say, true and sound wisdom, consists of two parts: the knowledge of God and of ourselves. And we excel and we pride ourselves how well we excel on the one. I mean, that's our bread and butter, but the other, we just don't know what's going on inside of us.
Yeah.
It's like some, friends of mine who sometimes joke, well, if I want to know what I'm feeling on the inside, I'll ask my wife, because we're so not in tune with what's happening.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's interesting, Chris, you brought that up. That reminds me of in 2002, when I was going through my first self-care crisis of burnout. I stumbled upon Eugene Peterson's book, The Contemplative Pastor. And in chapter 2, aptly named The Unbusy Pastor, which he said, is kind of an oxymoron. He said the reason we're busy, and that was part of the reason I was burning out, is I was just busy. He said, is because we're vain and we're lazy. And I was deeply offended by that. And he said, we're vain in that we care more about what people think about us. Therefore, we find ourselves committing to doing things, filling up our busy ministerial schedule to please the people, to meet those expectations. And then we're lazy, not in the fact that we're not hard workers, but that we let other people and other projects get to our calendar before we build in the key areas that we need to do for our calling. And yeah, I was deeply offended. And I said, I don't care what people think about me, and I am not lazy. And then the Holy Spirit put his thumb on my neck and just brought that gentle, firm, and grace-filled conviction. Charles, yes, you are an idolater. You care so much about what other people think. And you are lazy in this point, that you just will say yes to things without getting before me and seeking my direction and putting the important things like these self-care pieces in there. And you know what, guys, that little convicting part that Peterson said kind of started to get me out of that self-care crisis through some deep repentance, through some counsel, through kind of shifting gears down, canceling those meetings with all those couples before the marriage seminar. And so, yeah, that was a very pivotal point in that self-care crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's that internal lie that we so easily believe is, as you described that with your wife saying it's your marriage, you're useless to those couples and you'll do far more damage to them
Yes.
being the sage on marriage when yours is not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting, Charles. Sometimes it's those areas that we most react to, that we really need some attention.
Yeah. So true. So true. Yeah.
I'm curious, Chris, we were talking about maybe running a poll for the participants to see what they might identify as the most challenging of those 5 areas for themselves.
Yeah, I'll launch it now. It's out there, and guys can on the attendees click on that, and getting some as that's coming in. I just give that a little time for the panel or the attendees to answer. I just noticed a question here from Adam. How did burnout manifest in symptoms you may have overlooked at the time? So what, you kind of think, going over the edge, and by the time we're really going down, real burnout, it's a little, not necessarily too late, but you need some drastic measures. What are the early indicators, do you think, of burnout, where we can attend to some better personal care?
I think one of them for me was the idea of doing things without feeling anymore.
Yeah.
So I was still able to do important things, but I found myself almost not there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I experienced that too, like you, Vinny. I think another thing that I noticed was just I would be kind of snarky with my wife and kind of snarky and short-tempered with my kids. And I'm a nice and easy to like type person. And when other people would say, Charles, you're just kind of snarky, and that's just not like you. And I just didn't even realize that I was becoming unkind. I was losing the gentleness of Christ. And I just didn't have the emotional energy to be nice, to be caring.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of challenging for me.
Yeah, I can concur. I noticed that in myself as well.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you noticed that in him, but that's a whole
Oh,
nother issue.
No, I noticed the latter part, that he's a great guy. He's truly a Southern gentleman for sure.
Some of the ones that I've noticed myself and in talking with other pastors, especially in the time in which we've been cut off, is always asking the question, what are your soothing mechanisms? What are you running to? And for some of us, drinking more than we should, eating in ways that we shouldn't, that we normally, it should stand out. What are we watching? To be able to kind of quiet those anxious voices or what have you.
Yeah.
But the poll is in, and so what I'm seeing here, we've about 3/4 have voted. So of the 5 areas of self-care, which is most challenging for you now, 33% said emotional. That was the highest. Second was social relational, second at 25%. Coming close was 24%, and then 12% spiritual. And because we're all good Presbyterians, the place where least exercise is not a concern is the intellectual. There you go. And I think it that often does resonate.
Yeah.
Quite well. Any thoughts with those? From the two
Yeah, that's really interesting. One thing that Vinny and I have enjoyed together is our Friday talks. And we're not competitors, as sometimes pastors can be, that have a difficult time sharing stories because we might compare each other and do better or do worse. We kind of don't have anything to prove to each other. We can't really impress each other or disappoint each other. And so it is one of those rare gifts. And I think for me, being a little bit on the introverted side, I've somewhat enjoyed COVID. Wow, to have permission from the world that I don't have to be around people. Wow, that's awesome. But even in my introvertedness, I long for that connection with community. And so I think, as I could potentially struggle with discouragement, depression, and some of the mental health issues that many people are experiencing, I realize apart from the other things that I wrote on my list, just to have another brother to talk to and to be completely honest and to kind of take off that pastoral armor that we wear, that we have to have it all together, which is just fear and pride and insecurity and arrogance. But Vinny, I've just so appreciated our Friday times, and just not that we're necessarily counseling each other, but just, yeah, we're friends, we're coaching and comforting. And that's been a key thing for my self-care over these last months, or over these years that we've talked.
I'm glad. It's mutual for sure.
See a question here from Jordan. How do you engage in compassionate ministry without becoming emotionally overwhelmed? Because again, our calling is to serve others. And most of the people we serve are like us, a mess. And we can get pulled in so easily. What would you say to Jordan?
Yeah, I think the idea of not having to be the answer or to have the answer, not taking on other people's issues or problems. We all really only have one life to live, and that's the one that we're to live, which is hard enough, right? If we're really honest with ourselves. And so, just finding ways to be supportive and encouraging without, owning somebody else's life or issue. I think that is a good distinction to keep in mind as you're serving other people.
Yeah, I agree with that. What a great question, Jordan, that is. To have the emotional boundaries with emotional intelligence for self and emotional intelligence for others, to have those boundaries. And it is difficult not to take on the emotional burden for another person, because obviously we care for them and we want to shepherd them, but it is difficult. And so I think intercessory prayer and journaling has been a way for me to kind of not hold it, but to put it on a prayer journal, to pray for that person. And then when I see them or text, or I can touch base. So maybe the physical act of writing it down and praying for it keeps me from feeling like I need to take it on as my own.
Yeah.
So I think the concept, again, from the really very helpful book written by a rabbi, Failure of Nerve, and the understanding of self-differentiation, understanding that I want for me to help that person, I can't become that person. I can't absorb them into me, then I'm no longer helpful. So there's got to be a separation. And Friedman's book I found very helpful in thinking in a way that often haven't seen in many other places, in a great way. That's good. Good.
Yeah, earlier someone had mentioned about Pete Scazzero's books, multiple emotional healthy series, and I've read all of those, found them to be super helpful. But you're right, Michael, he does bring in those themes of self-care. And then Brian asked a great question. What do you think it is about pastors that make us most susceptible to difficulty with emotional health? And that's a good question. I see in myself and in a lot of other ministerial staff, kind of two things. One is emotions are bad. And maybe that comes from this dualistic thinking that kind of spiritual is good and emotional is bad. But also, we just don't have the safety with a lot of people to just blah, to
Mhm.
be real. And so that's where, I think just the friendships that we talk about with other friends or fellow pastors, coaching is a great opportunity where someone's not going to try to just fix you or give you advice or tell you what to do. You probably don't need counseling, but you just need a place where you can process these things emotionally. And I think in that context, I learned how to speak that language better, to process the emotions without it being counseling, and getting a vocabulary, and that helped with self-care and emotional care too.
Yeah, I remember going through that burnout season and being in a small group where it was a peer group. We were all in the same boat, and the leader said, at the beginning of each meeting, here's a feeling wheel. So you have all the words on here. You have to start out by saying how you're feeling, and you can't say tired. And it was a 3-week everyday group. And in the first few, I had trouble figuring out what it is. But by the second week and then the third week, I had ability to kind of know where I am. It doesn't always mean you got to fix it or change it. Just being able to be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that was stated over and over was, passionate God, passionate people.
Mm.
In other words, God is full of passion, emotion, if you will. So, of course, those who are made in his image are going to have the same. And we tend to classify emotions. Well, here's the bad ones and here's the good ones.
Mm-hmm.
The bad ones, you could easily fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
Anger is probably on top of the list.
Mm-hmm.
And joy is on the good list, right? But I came to realize they're both on the list.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I don't have to judge good or bad. I just have to try to be
Yeah.
aware of where I'm at.
Yeah. And most lists, all the lists I've seen, 7 to 9 key core emotions. There's only 1 or 2 that we say are good emotions.
Yeah.
And it's again that we shouldn't think good and bad.
That's right.
We should be thinking this is what's happening in that sense. Now
Mm-hmm.
you've mentioned coaching as a way through this, and on the Q&A box, John Anderson asked a question: how do you communicate with your elders or session about your need? And well, may not be able to get right to that, but I know the two of you do coaching. So where does coaching fit in here? What does it look like? How might that help?
Well, I think one way to get at that is to hear from a couple of participants how what they've learned about the importance of self-care,
Mm-hmm.
and then also how coaching has helped them. Now, I'm not trying to skirt the question. I know both Charles and I are passionate about coaching, and maybe we could talk a little bit about that on the back end of that. But I would think that might be a good place to go next for just for the audience to really hear some experience from people just like them.
Yeah. All right. So bringing in two of the folks who these guys know ahead of time that they were going to be doing this. So the rest of you don't need to worry that we're going to just all of a sudden bring you in. But there's David.
Hi, David.
Hi. How are you today?
Welcome, and thank you for being willing to come on and share your experience.
Sure.
So what have you learned in particular about the importance of self-care, with regards to your life and ministry? You're a busy pastor.
Yeah, well, I think because 2 things were going on, the pandemic in particular, but then also a new season in church life. I was starting a new area. We were doing a church plant, sort of like a church plant, a second worship site. Then I was moving toward, now it's here. I'm moving to a new time. this has been helpful to me to think of it in terms of making an investment in order to be able to sustain long-term ministry. So that's how I frame self-care, I think, in my life. Is it's really for the benefit of others if I invest in it and can continue to do my calling for the long term. And it's been helpful to rethink of it that way.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. And what place would you say that professional coaching has had in assisting you in that?
Yeah. Couple things. It's good to build up a relationship with someone you begin to trust, and that takes some time. So it just didn't happen immediately, but over time that happens. And someone outside the context that's helpful, that I have a regular time in my schedule, that I know I prepare for a conversation and then have a conversation. And it's so easy for just the particular busyness of life to just kind of never get to those things. So it locks in a time that I'm going to be responsible to show up and have that conversation. And then it over time, and again, it's not just the first month or two, but over time, it's helped me deal with a lot of particular issues about my tendencies, about things. I wrote down some things that we've talked about over the last couple years, how I tend to deal with people, and talk about that, how I tend to focus, what I tend to focus on in meetings, how I need to work to bring other people along with me, my different natural tendencies and the benefits of those tendencies, along with the challenges of those tendencies, to really explore that. And right now we're working on focus and use of time kind of in all of life. So those types of things have been helpful. And something you said earlier, the idea of recognizing we have limitations and owning that. And instead of always, I think our basic approach is let's fix the limitations and then I can go on. But instead to honor God and say, here are my limitations. Now, how do I minister with those? Honoring that I'm a creature that's dependent on God, and making sure that I'm honoring that calling that he's given us, being limited, and yet then ministering not as some super being, but as a person out of those limitations and by his grace.
Mm. Wow. So owning your limits and your limitations, and then ministering out of who you are in the midst of that.
Yeah, without saying, I just need to be somebody different. But it said, the Lord's called me to this. Now, how do I maintain this? Fix things that are wrong, obviously, but also be able to say, well, what other people do I need? What other ways do we do this? And I think that's what self-care, to me, it's a hard term to use for the same reason other people are struggling with it. It seems selfish, right? But if I think of it in terms of this is really honoring God in my life, but also inviting other people in so that the ministry can continue long term, because it's not only about me. It's about God doing his work through his people, and to be, what part do I play, but then what part do others play? It's been very helpful to think through that.
Wow. Thank you, David, for being so vulnerable and open to share
Sure.
your experience.
Sure.
Manuel, I'd love for you to jump in, and I'd love to hear from you as well. What you've learned, about the importance of self-care as it relates to your life and ministry as a pastor.
Yeah, thank you, Vinny. I think one of the things that stands out is that self-care requires humility. The reality of my pride, it's suppressed, but it's there more than I imagine. And I think functionally denying, the real physical, emotional limitations of my creatureliness, body and soul, I think that just played in and highlighted the pride. And I think it downplayed God's wisdom. Surely I take out some vacation, exercise, spend time with family, but I didn't do so within the framework of God's design for my well-being over the long term and for his glory. And so, like others, experience fatigue and burnout, but I felt it. I think that the lack of self-care in my loss of joy in the ministry. I was doing the tasks, maybe as you mentioned earlier, with a bit of numbness, but there was no joy. And the other thing that happened is I lost perspective, as if the ministry were the primary objective as opposed to my walk with God. So that was just enlightening to me to see self-care in those ways.
Those are so pertinent, those connections that you were just talking about in terms of what you've gained and gleaned. Hard won, right?
Right. For sure.
Yeah. And then what else would you say in terms of just how coaching has been helpful to you in particular?
I think there's three things, and we've already alluded to them before. It's perspective. It's because I'll tend to have tunnel vision. You know, I get super focused on goals and tasks, and lose sight of more significant priorities and calling. And I think the excellent listening and the questions that, you know, the coach has brought, I think broadens the horizon of ministry and life, so that I don't lose sight of those important issues. They come right back into focus. And that's just, to me, it's just one of those things I lose focus easily. And the secondly would be listening. And I spent a lot of time in the pastoral ministry, listening to others, listening to their problems. And it's a real refreshment to my soul to have someone else listen to me and not try to fix me. You know, listen with wisdom and compassion. And you know, it feels good to be cared for. It's kind of an unusual feeling. Oh, someone cares for me, you know, without, you know, obviously there are people who do care for me, but just that listening aspect of the care. And the other one is reflection, as was mentioned earlier. That scheduled opportunity for reflection that I wouldn't normally, you know, build into my schedule. So, you know, to be able to, before I meet with the coach, to reflect, to think, and then during the coaching experience also being able to listen to myself and hear things that weren't on the surface, but God by His Spirit is brought to the surface through the questions and the conversation. So I think that those three things, perspective, listening, and reflection, have been really helpful.
Wow. Thanks so much, Manuel, for sharing that. Yeah, that really is so much of what coaching is about. It's not a telling kind of service, it's a drawing out service. And we're drawing out, a good coach is trained to draw out what God has put in. And the space that, you know, the safe space enables that, you know, the listening and the questioning and the interacting. Thanks so much for sharing that, Manuel.
Sure thing.
Well, good. Well, what would you recommend for those that are listening? You've heard two good testimonies. What would be some good next steps along this line? Certainly you have ideas of what the good next steps are.
Yeah. Well,
Charles,
yeah,
please.
My 2 cents, Vinny and I are available, and Chris is available. We all do coaching, and we'd love to be of service. And we usually would have a first conversation to hear what you're thinking and what you're interested in talking about. And we all have professional training as coaches, and also obviously as ordained pastors, we understand that side of it. So yeah, we'd be glad to speak with any of you if we could be of service in that way.
So for a lot of us as pastors, you know, as Manuel was saying, you know, we give, we listen, we don't take that time to be listened to. And so maybe just for some of us, we've never been through coaching. maybe never been in any kind of a counseling context in which we are the counselee and not the counselor. So what does coaching look like? How would you describe it? Nikki mentioned here, how does coaching different from counseling, discipling?
Yeah, I think counseling would be more focused in on healing from past wounds and the things that maybe hold you back
Mm-hmm.
from growing and developing. Whereas coaching is more you're in a good place, so to speak. That it's not like you have no issues, but that's not really front and center. What's front and center is you're looking to move forward and to make greater progress and development. And so coaching is particularly skilled at looking in and out, going in terms of going forward.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It also seems like a processing person who's objective, who's confidential, to really help think through strategy, projects, staffing issues, is really helpful. So it's not really a kind of an athletic type of coaching, get in your face, yell at you, tell
Yeah,
you
you're
what to
not
do.
yelling at them, come on, do it better.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a processing partner who's objective and who's going to keep the focus on you and not
Mm-hmm.
tell you their stories and their advice. And you just have to experience it if you never have. We'd invite you to experience it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we'd love to offer those on the call. You can go to our landing page on M&A and sign up for a complimentary 30-minute discovery call to see if that's something you'd like to do. We are available to offer one-to-one coaching to folks who may need it or want it. We've also toyed with the idea of maybe having peer coaching, where someone like one of us professional coaches would lead a group of 4 or 6 through a monthly meeting to do coaching that way. We'd like to be of service. We'd like to be of encouragement, as those who've been on both sides of the table, if you will, and see the tremendous benefit that coaching can provide for key leaders.
Good. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to access the help in this area, because we're talking about self-care. We thrown a number of books out there, and reading a book can be very helpful, but talking with someone through it who has some training. I love the distinction you made between counseling and coaching. So counseling more dealing with the past issues and hurts. Coaching is where you're at right now, moving forward. And it's not an either or. I'm sure there are times in coaching you've gone, you need a good counselor, that there's some deeper issues here than what we can deal with in this time.
That's right.
And so we shouldn't have to try to make that type of choice, one or the other. But different times of life, both can be very, very beneficial. And
I appreciated what Charles was saying about a process.
Mm-hmm.
Coaching is about the process. And I remember being in the senior leadership roles in the church and just not having a place to vet my thoughts and feelings in a way that wouldn't be judged. And, we are expertly trained how to create a no judgment zone. That's not the point of what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So it's a safe space.
Yeah. Well, I want to pick up on a question I alluded to from John Anderson. He said, how do you communicate to your elders about your need for self-care and to have it woven into your schedule? Now, I could almost tie in there kind of the second question being, how do you tell your elders, I'd like to hire a coach? And they go, look at our budget. And, if you want to do it on your own, you can, but along those, how do you encourage along both those lines?
Well, for the second question, part B, I should say, I often tell guys, every senior leader, every executive leader, which pastors are, has a professional development allowance. And I think, Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 68% of executive leaders see coaching as a primary go-to for that.
Yeah.
So,
And so
the broader executive level, or is that what you're finding, Charles?
yes. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's not like those manly men who are at C-level, in corporations. They could do it themselves. What's wrong with you wimpy pastors? You're telling us that this is much more the norm, because we shouldn't be a surprise. We need people in our lives speaking to us. We shouldn't be doing it on our own. Okay, well, good. Yeah. So making sure that's woven in to the professional allowance. Okay.
Yeah. And another thing I've noticed is you think about how much money it costs to go to a conference, hotel, expenses, airfare, travel, and then 3 months or 6 months later, what's the long lasting value? And if you just decided not to go to one conference in a year and then invest that money in, every 2 weeks, talking to someone who's trained to really bring out your best and has a Christian world and life view, the change is markedly different. And so I started investing in coaching and saying no to that cool conference.
But I got a bunch of notebooks on my shelf that are pretty dusty right now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And what about the other conversations with the session, the first part of that? How do you talk to your elders about your need, especially in this area of self-care?
Yeah, I've coached a lot of pastors, and so that was a question: how to communicate to their session, kind of after that 6 or 8 or 12-month engagement was complete. Many of those pastors said, Charles, my session has said they've seen the results in me, in my preaching, in my leadership. They want to build that into the budget. And so it's almost like we need to pay the power bill. We need to pay the people that keep the lights on at the church. We need to pay for someone who's going to care for our pastor. And obviously the session can still care for the pastor, but it's kind of like our boss is also our shepherd. Sometimes that's a little awkward. And so that's encouraging. I don't know if it answers the question, but at least sessions are realizing we need to make sure that we're taking care of our pastor.
Yeah. I mean, the one suggestion I threw out there for him was even as a session for leaders to go through Scazzario's book, Healthy Leader. That should generate the conversations, not just it's about me, it's about each of us. What are we all doing for self-care? And I think making that a group part is really good. Well, excellent. We're running just about out of time. Appreciate everyone joining us next week, or I'm sorry, not next week, next month. We will be continuing on in this theme. We'll be looking at, we're talking about, and so much of what you're hearing about in this whole series that we're doing is coming from Resilient Ministry, in which these different categories of spiritual formation, soul care, emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, marriage and family, and leadership and management are the key areas in which we need so much attention to be paid, and coaching can be an important component of that. So join us. Threw up the link there. Sign up now for March 10th. Then we have another one in April on the second Wednesday looking at spiritual formation. And so would love to have you join us. And until then, and then 2 weeks from now, we'll have another one, a different seminar series on looking at church planting networks, hearing what's going on around the country in those various places and ways. And so until then, we are glad you're with us. Lord bless, and see you in a few weeks. Bye.